Did I hit end broadcast there? No, I think we're good. Okay, cool. I wanted to make sure I didn't hit end broadcast on accident. What's up, y'all? This is Bud Elliott on the Cover 3 College Ball Podcast. I realize in the offseason we do a great job of taking some mailbag questions. A lot of y'all drop those in the Apple Podcast comment section, and really appreciate y'all doing that. It helps our rankings stay nice and high, and it gives good feedback from the listeners. But during the season, we don't really have a dedicated mailbag episode. We try to sprinkle them in, where we can. But I figured, hey, let's get some more audience interaction here with a Tuesday lunchtime college football chat hangout thing. Hope you all take your lunch with us each and every Tuesday. Normally happening sometime between 11 and noon, depending on what we're doing there. Also live on this channel, 3 o'clock Eastern on Mondays. Wednesdays we don't go live. I think Thursdays we do the Locks Pod at 11, and then of course live on Saturday nights for the midnight episode. So yeah, let's go ahead and dive in to some mailbag questions here that we got. Of course, Cover 3, hit that thumbs up, hit the notifications on, so when we go live, y'all can check us out. Available on Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify, basically wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you guys have questions, drop them in the chat as well. I will take live questions here on the show to go along with this. I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about some of this weekend's games that interest me. And off the top, yesterday we hit Ohio State pretty hard. We talked about Iowa. We talked about some of those teams that played higher profile games over the weekend. One game that was off the radar last weekend, unless you're a fan of that team, was LSU. LSU played McNeese State. And I got to tell you here, the results were not good. Now, it's McNeese State. It's an FCS team. Certainly their result was not as bad as the school that I went to, Florida State. They didn't lose to an FCS team like FSU lost to Jacksonville State. But McNeese is not a great team. LSU's offense is still asking Max Johnson and those receivers and that offensive line to do things that Joe Burrow did. And I know that was the reason for Ed Orgeron bringing back the coordinator that he did, who was connected to Joe Brady and that 2019 LSU passing game. But it's very clear now through 2 games that they do not have the personnel in terms of talent and in terms of experience and understanding the scheme to run that exactly like the 2019 LSU team did. I think they're asking way too much out of these guys right now. And 4.7 yards per play, I believe it was. Let me pull up my exact numbers here just so I can be accurate with this analysis. 4.7 yards per play against McNeese State is a real cause for concern, right? That's not something that's going to work. 16 of 32 passing game, 50%, 5.3 yards per pass, 4.2 yards per rush. Y'all, this could get ugly quickly. Sometimes things are bad and you don't really know it because of how the schedule breaks. We saw LSU's offense against UCLA. It did not look coherent. We saw it against McNeese State. Well, I didn't really watch the whole game, but I caught bits and pieces and saw some of the highlights. A slow start. They finally turned it on kind of in that middle 8. But think about what the game was last year that everybody said, oh man, Ed Orgeron doesn't know what he's doing. It was the Mississippi State game in week 1 when a Mississippi State offense that looked worse and worse and worse every week, but not in week 1. They blitzed LSU like crazy and just dunked all over them. And what did people say? They said, it's the coordinator hires, right? He lost Dave Aranda. He lost Joe Brady there. He brought in Bro Pelini. It's not really working. The offensive coordinator he brought in, not really working, although certainly not as bad as the defense was. So far, it doesn't look like Ed Orgeron has nailed these coordinator hires. And where do they go next week? Because this weekend they have Central Michigan. But let's get out ahead of this narrative. 2 weeks, they go to Starkville. That's going to be a big game. If LSU doesn't look right in Starkville, if they lose to Mississippi State again, after Bama is just dunking on the world, those folks are not going to be happy. My wife went to LSU. My in-laws are all LSU. I told them UCLA will probably beat you guys. I think UCLA is a better team. They said, look, Bud, I know you work in sports, man, but you're crazy. My wife was like, I don't know. Like, Bud kind of knows what he's talking about sometimes. I said, all right, we'll watch. Man, something doesn't look right there yet. Maybe it will look better as the year goes on. Obviously, they've been disrupted by the hurricane. I don't want to discount that fact. I'm sure that has affected, their install and their practice. I don't believe they'll lose to Central Michigan. But let's just get ahead of this narrative here. LSU so far does not look very improved from where it was last year, despite new coordinator hires on both sides of the ball. And if they go out and they lose to Mississippi State, the patience there is going to wear thin. And I believe that the chatter will ramp up, like not quite to the Clay Helton level, but there's going to be some serious discontent there in Baton Rouge if they don't improve and quickly. All right. Man, it's going to be a 3-cup day for me. Let's go to the next one here. Discuss the West Virginia and Virginia Tech game if you get a chance. Sure. So if you guys followed the live betting stream that I do on Sundays live here on the Cover 3 channel, you know that I bet Virginia Tech, and I bet the over in that game, +3 and over 47.5. Now, I will note here, I don't love that bet quite as much as I did at the time because, unfortunately, some important injury news came out yesterday. And that injury news is that James Mitchell, who in my opinion is the best tight end in the ACC and one of the best tight ends in the country, is going to be out for the year for the Hokies. He's an important weapon in that passing offense, but also as a guy that can split out, who's a good blocker on screens, but maybe not the best inline blocker in the world, but that's a fairly big deal there. Virginia Tech is favored in this game, and now I'm sitting here, West Virginia is favored in this game, and now I'm sitting here on this Vatech ticket, and I'm thinking, man, I'm walking into a trap. I can't get out of it, obviously. I'm not going to play it back. I do think Vatech is going to be better in this game along the lines of scrimmage, but losing James Mitchell is a really big deal. That's an important piece for the Hokies, and he's a guy they use a lot in a lot of different ways. Schematically, that is an important deal. I also think that how well will the Hokies test West Virginia's pass defense on the outside? We actually saw West Virginia, despite a lot of their offseason losses to the transfer portal, hold up fairly well on the outside against a Maryland offense that I believe has a lot of explosive players on the edges. So to me, can Virginia Tech win on the outside? Because I do believe that the Hokies will be better along the lines of scrimmage based on what I saw them do against North Carolina, although certainly a little bit of a disappointing effort last weekend against a lesser foe there, for West Virginia. All right, let's go ahead and take Ethan's question. This is an interesting one, and it's one that we might get some serious debate about during this season. Which is the better job, USC or LSU? So both these programs have won national titles in the last 20 years. Both these programs have shown that if you do it right, you can have sustained dominance, right? And both these programs have ridiculous recruiting bases. So, of course, that's why they have that sustained dominance over long periods of time. But they also have shown that if you don't get the right guy in there, they can fail. USC has not lived up to its potential over the last decade or so. Part of that was coming off the Reggie Bush sanctions that, in my opinion, were unfair and would not be levied in the same way today if the committee, Council of Infractions was in place. But LSU has also struggled at times in the last decade, but not to the same extent as USC. LSU has SEC TV money, but they also have much stiffer competition. So they have more resources, but their opponents also have more resources. I believe that USC actually has a larger resource edge in terms of finances compared to its competition in the market, right? So their Pac-12 competition, as opposed to LSU, where is LSU going to outspend Alabama or A&M or Georgia or maybe a Florida, schools like that? Probably not. They all get huge checks from the SEC network. They're all going to spend like crazy. Where LSU benefits relative to the SEC is that it is the only SEC school in its state. That is something pretty important there to note, because they really don't lose very many kids from in their state to other programs, even when they're not doing well. Kids in the state of Louisiana are born and they believe they're just kind of ordained to go to LSU in most circumstances. Now, there's some pockets up there in the Monroe area, kind of the Arklatex corridor, if you will, where kids will leave the state. But for the most part, most of the kids that LSU wants in its own state, it gets. USC, though, when it's right, does the exact same thing in the Los Angeles area and realistically, west of the Rockies. Geographically, I used to say that USC has right of first refusal on any kid it wants west of the Rockies, and that's no longer ironclad. Kids are now willing to travel much farther away from home than they used to. However, they still, if USC is right, they're going to get guys who they want. From Bosco, from Modern Day, from all those powerhouse schools out there. I do not believe there's enough talent on the West Coast to have 4 and 5 and 6 elite programs out there right now. But if USC can go back to doing what it was doing, which was keeping the best players on the West Coast home, it absolutely can be as good as any program in the country. The issue there is not the quality of talent for the most part. It is the volume of quality, as I've quantified in some articles, where there's some talent flight from out west going to other states at the high school level. They don't have enough big bodies to sustain, a ton of elite programs. But can you sustain 1 or 2 elite programs out west? Absolutely can. And USC has a leg up on everybody if they do it right. That's why when we saw the live chat yesterday with the news that Clay Helton got fired, Oregon fans are like, please don't say Cristobal. Please don't say Cristobal. Please don't say Cristobal, because they know how good of a recruiter he is in Southern California when USC is down. They have not had to see Mario Cristobal recruit against a USC program when it's up. So for me, these jobs are really sort of in the same stratosphere. And it comes down to, where do you want to be? If you're at USC, you are not as much of a fishbowl as you are in LSU. But where are you more comfortable recruiting, right? At LSU, do you think Ed Orgeron can go out to dinner without being accosted? Is not the right word, but probably ask for an autograph or, hey, coach. At USC, that's a big enough city to where you can be sort of anonymous. So if you want to be able to go out to dinner with your wife and sort of check out from work for a little bit, not that you're not famous, but you're just not as famous as movie stars and celebrities and that type of thing in LA. But where do you want to recruit? Do you want to recruit SoCal? Do you want to recruit more in the state of Louisiana? Where are your contacts at the high school level? Where are the guys you want to bring in to help you from? Those all matter. So really, I don't have a huge opinion, assuming that USC is going to pony up and spend at the level it needs to spend it. If it goes cheap, then LSU's a better job, even though the competition at LSU is stronger. I do think your longevity prognosis is better at USC. I think you're much more likely to be able to hold a job down for 10 years if you want it at USC than you are at LSU, simply because there's so much more talent you have to face in the SEC. There are many more losable games in the SEC than there are in the Pac-12 if you're doing it right. For instance, if LSU is at peak efficiency, they could still lose to an A&M or a Bama or a Georgia or Florida in a given year, multiple games. If USC is at peak efficiency, they will be favored in every game that they play in the Pac-12 every single year. Their ceiling is not reachable by anybody else in that league, and that includes Oregon. And I think Oregon is doing a really good job hitting its ceiling and maybe raising its ceiling a little bit. But you cannot tell me that Oregon's ceiling is higher than USC's ceiling if they're both operating at true peak efficiency. So it's a great question. I know it's a question that if LSU doesn't pick it up here pretty soon, we'll probably be debating. Maybe it's a YouTube video that'll go wild when we clip this. But let me know in the comment section of this video what you think. What is a better job, LSU or USC? Both tremendous jobs. All right. Let's go ahead and take another question here. I'm not going to put that one on the air. So Hog Muncher says, is this the most chaotic ACC Coastal yet? Is Pitt the new favorite there? I don't think Pitt is the new favorite yet in the ACC Coastal. I would probably still favor North Carolina, believe it or not, although they do have that loss in conference, which makes it tough for them. Just let me go ahead and pull down my list here to see kind of current divisional odds. So the Hokies mathematically might have it right now. But look, they also lost James Mitchell, as we discussed just a couple of minutes on this live stream. That's a pretty big blow for them. They're also underdogs at West Virginia. So I will say Vegas power ratings are not quite buying in yet on the Hokies, despite the fact they absolutely jumped North Carolina and got me that money line sprinkle there. I think North Carolina is the right favorite in this division, even though they have the division loss. Pitt scares me a little bit for this reason. I don't think they're quite as good on the defensive line as they have been in years past, which is what has helped make that defense go. Additionally, Pitt's run game is terrible. Pitt is going to play games this year like producer Jordan saw last weekend against Tennessee. He's a Tennessee fan. That they just can't put games away. If Pitt could run the ball late in the game and grind the game away, they would not have had the crazy last 10 minutes that lasted almost an hour against the Volunteers because the clock would be running and they'd be putting this game away. Instead, Pitt has to keep throwing. That's just kind of what they are right now. Offensive line-wise, from a run blocking standpoint, they're not that good. And that will lead to some games that they will blow later in the year because they're unable to hold leads. We've actually seen this pattern from them a little bit in the past few years. Miami has an important game this weekend if you want to talk ACC Coastal. Guys, on the live show, I bet Michigan State plus 7.5 when it opened up. That line's down to 5 now. Michigan State's not a bad team. Now, should they be under a touchdown? I think so, but not a ton under a touchdown. I think Miami's still a good football team. They did lose linebacker Keontre Smith to injury, so he's going to miss a significant period of time. That's a bad blow for them because Miami, as we know, was already really struggling at the linebacker position in camp. Our guys at Inside the U, David Lake and Gabby, they identified linebacker as the true weakness of the Miami defense, whereas they thought the defensive line, if healthy, and the secondary as pretty good units. They thought the linebackers were a concern. And to lose Keontre Smith when they did is problematic for them. So do you really believe that Miami is going to be able to run the table there or to finish with just one loss in the ACC? Personally, I don't. I think they're probably a more of a 2-loss ACC team, and they have to go to North Carolina. North Carolina was my pick for the Coastal because of its ability to play man coverage against the Hurricanes, right? We have seen in past, if you have the corners to play good man coverage against Miami, their offense is in trouble. And that is what North Carolina did to them last year. That is what Clemson largely did to them last year. And that is what Alabama did to them in the opening game. North Carolina's corners, not the whole defense, but the corners for Carolina are very good players, and they have a large advantage, in my opinion, over Miami's receivers. So for that reason, I do still favor North Carolina to win the ACC Coastal. But it's certainly much more wide open. Virginia, with its pass protection now, looks like it can probably score on most anybody. So we'll have to see what happens. I'm going to be keeping an eye on that game this weekend when they go to Chapel Hill. But the Coastal is kind of back to being super wide open, and that's difficult. All right, I got a couple questions about Arkansas here, so let's go ahead and transition to Arkansas with these questions. All right. Josh Medlock says, just joined in. Have you talked about the Texas-Arkansas game this past weekend? And do you feel like Arkansas is a trap game with Georgia Southern? Jordan, by the way, wanted me to ask, is it possible that Tennessee's run defense is good? LOL. It is possible, just given what I've seen from Pitt in recent years as an ACC guy myself, I'm a little bit skeptical, but yeah, they could be good. We'll monitor that. That's worth monitoring. So Arkansas, what did Arkansas do well against Texas? They presented a multitude of defensive looks. which confused young quarterback Hudson Card, and he was inaccurate on some of the deep shots that Texas had open, which they did create a couple explosive opportunities in this game that they were unable to cash in on. Texas also had a couple drops on potentially explosive plays. The key takeaway here, as we noted in the Monday show, was that Arkansas was able to generate a lot of pressure on Texas without blitzing. This is an Arkansas defense that does not blitz very often. And so when it is able to generate pressure without the blitz, I mean, look, any defense is going to be good when it generates pressure without blitzing, because that means you're playing coverage with an adequate number of coverage defenders while still generating pressure without using extra men who could be in coverage to blitz. Ask any defensive coordinator in the country, hey, do you like your odds if you can get home with 3 or 4? Of course. Yeah, you're going to play good defense pretty consistently, right? If you can do that. And Arkansas this weekend did do so. I would say something that is concerning for Texas was how effectively Arkansas was able to run the football on the Longhorns defense. That is where I missed on this game. I bet Texas at -3.5. I think the game closed closer to 7. Look, I'm never going to doubt myself when I get closing line value, which simply means is what I'm betting better than what the market closes at, because I do trust the market and I believe it's an efficient market in the college football space. But Arkansas was able to run all over Texas, and that is concerning because there are some other teams in the Big 12 who may be able to do the same, right? Iowa State is a very similar defense to what Arkansas plays. They're going to be a 3-man front. They can get home with 3. They can frustrate you and cover with 8, and they can run the football. TCU defensively is a little bit different style, but offensively, TCU running the football with Zach Evans, as Cal found out, can be extremely effective. Obviously, Oklahoma has a nice offensive line, and that should basically, I have concerns about Texas' run defense after seeing how well Arkansas bullied them at the line of scrimmage. I want to credit Arkansas, by the way. In the preseason, I was really of the opinion that last year, Arkansas, as far as bounces of the ball, was fairly lucky. I thought they had a lot of turnover luck. Now, Arkansas fans would counter and say they got screwed out of the Auburn game. And if you want to make that argument, I don't totally disagree with you. However, it is possible that you were lucky one year and good the next, or better the next. There's no law that says you can't improve as a team. And I do think that Sam Pittman's team has improved year 1 over year 2. And so if Arkansas, if they just get neutral luck, I don't know how many additional games they'll win this year compared to what they did last year in conference. But I do see signs of improvement there. Whereas last year, I thought they were a little bit lucky. And, to me, that's something that is worth monitoring here. All right, let's keep scrolling and scrolling to see. Got a question about Anthony Richardson. I'm going to pass on that one for now. We talked about him a little bit on Monday, and I know we have some content coming on Wednesday that we'll discuss. So, Colin, I appreciate you asking that one, but I know we have some stuff coming on Wednesday. So be sure to check the Wednesday show if you can there on that one. Let's find out. Should USC hire John Bosco's coach? No, we're going to go ahead and not hire a high school coach. As I discussed yesterday on the live show, USC should just hire a good, competent football coach without the requirement that the guy have coached at USC or, be a graduate of USC. Like, you really don't need some kind of connection to USC. All right. Who do you got this weekend between Virginia and UNC? Go Hoos. I think this is a fun game. I mean, I don't know about y'all, but I'm looking forward to this one. As I talked about a little bit ago, Virginia is a pretty good offense. They can pass protect well. They buy time for quarterback Brennan Armstrong to find the open guy. And Armstrong really does a nice job of trusting his receivers, and his guys play the ball well in the air. However, North Carolina has very nice defensive backs. To me, that's fun. You're going to have a fun matchup this weekend between the ability of UVA's guys to go up and get the ball and between North Carolina's defensive backs. Now, I made this line 7.5. What is it sitting now? I know I didn't bet anything on it on Sunday. The line is 9. To be honest, to go to 8, 8.5, 9, that's not something I'm looking to get involved with right now. Personally, I don't see any real point there. from a total perspective, 67.5 or 67 is a little bit high for me. I considered playing the under there. It keeps ticking up and ticking up. Virginia is this is an important note for gambling purposes. Virginia through 2 games, I know they feel very confident in their offense, but they also are an increased tempo team over recent years. They actually are above the national average in my own tempo rankings. I don't share those because I think they're proprietary. But from how I see it, I think Virginia is playing more up tempo than they have been. By the way, spoiler here. If you guys are watching the chat, I really appreciate it. We're about 25 minutes in. Arizona is an absolute tempo freak team right now. They are going so fast to where, like, until the books catch up, you need to just bet overs on Arizona every time until the books catch up, because they are stealing 1 to 2 additional possessions per game, which means that Vegas is going to be short on how many points they're going to score, so far at least. And after watching 2 games and how they operate, yeah. Now, on the other side of this Virginia and UNC game, Virginia's defense is okay. Is it great? Can they run with North Carolina, or will they force North Carolina to be patient? How well can they stop North Carolina's run game? Those are all questions I want some answers to, because UNC could not run the ball if Sam Howell was not involved. I think Sam Howell is a good but not great, like, NFL type prospect. I think he'll get drafted. Is he legitimately a top 10 type pick? I have some questions there. I really don't like that whole recruiting class of quarterbacks. I feel like the real elite talent there skipped a year from when we had Trevor and Justin Fields and those guys. Kind of skipped a year to the Bryce Young, DJ, CJ Stroud year. That whole class of quarterbacks, I'm just kind of, we'll see on. And, Howell was in that class, as were a number of other guys. And that was the 2019 class, I think. So we'll see how UNC looks. I still think UNC is the favorite. I want to see more consistency out of that offense. I want to see them be able to run the football better. And that's what I'm going to be looking for in that one. But I do think right now the numbers are mostly okay. If this stays where it is at 67.5, I will likely fire an under. But at this point, the number keeps going up. So I'm just going to wait it out a little bit. Okay. You were early on the AR-15 train. Okay, so let's talk about some future stars of college football. Look, guys, I don't say I got lucky on AR-15. So Anthony Richardson at Florida, the quarterback, who I know we're going to talk more about on the Wednesday show, as I said earlier to Colin when he asked about it. But I saw him at the Florida Classic All-Star game, not the HBCU Florida Classic, but I forgot the name of it, Florida Legends game, Florida Legends Showcase. In any case, if you live in Florida, there is a game every year. They play it in Tampa, where the top juniors in the state, they play an all-star game. It's right before Christmas. So, typically back before I lived in Orlando, I would go to it before I went to the in-laws for Christmas. It was kind of on my way. And I went to that practice that they had for the Legends game. So this would have been, AR is a freshman this year. So it would have been like 2 Christmases ago. And I walked up, and I had never seen Richardson in person, right? I'd seen his film, but I'd never seen him physically in person. And the guys were wearing a tank top and a bandana. And I thought he was a coach. Richardson is jacked as hell. Okay. Like, he literally, he was running some stuff, and they were doing walkthroughs. So he was kind of talking it through. And I thought he was going to be one of the coaches there. I was like, the guy looks kind of young for a coach, but for a junior in high school, he looked closer to like a grown man high school coach looking guy than he did to a junior in high school. And I was like, where does he coach at? And then this other guy was like, oh no, that's Richardson. It's like, that is Anthony Richardson? Okay. Yeah. And Jordan in the background, I could see shaking his head, because obviously he's a Tennessee fan. He has to face this kid in future years. And anyway, Florida signed a quarterback who looked like an absolute grown man. Now, as a passer, I actually think he's got a lot of skill. He's a little bit raw, but he's not so raw as like a Joe Milton type who just couldn't hit the broadside of the barn in high school or in 7-on-7. I think he'll continue to get better. I think Dan Mullen is a good developer of quarterbacks, and I think Richardson will be a really nice player for Florida, who I project to take over in the future. The other guy I was really high on coming into this year was Trevion Henderson. If you listen to the old Barton and Bud podcast, we basically agreed that he would start for Ohio State last year if he could have just skipped his senior year of high school and enrolled. I think he's that good, and I think he'll continue to be a major weapon there for Ohio State. This is actually a good mailbag for me to sit on and think about guys who are not currently playing or not playing a lot who are going to be stars pretty soon. Let me look at like who's gotten snaps so far, and I'll have a better answer for y'all next week. Here's one. Sports Illustrated is starting a rumor of FSU looking at Dion to replace Norvell. Can you explain to people why that won't happen this year and maybe not even next year? Yeah, so FSU is still paying Willie Taggart's buyout. They're not going to be in the business of making a coaching change every 2 years. It's just not financially sound to do so. It's also really a dumb move to continue to make coaching changes after only 2 years in the early signing period era, in my opinion, because the attrition that you suffer every time that you sign a new class is pretty significant. And this is across the board, I've noticed. So even though A&M is doing well with a coach who was hired in the ESP era, only 30% of that 2018 class remains on that roster. So we're seeing this at schools that are doing poorly and at schools that are doing well. Those classes that you sign when you only have a couple weeks to put it together when you're hired before that ESP era, they get rocked. A lot of times those kids you sign are available for a reason. And typically it's a bad reason. So, oh, hey, we got this 4-star. Well, maybe he was actually available to be signed because he was a bad kid, bad person, maybe a bad teammate, that type of thing. Deion Sanders is not going to get the Florida State job at all. That will not happen. It's not a thing. Deion is really good at getting his name out there and making sure that he stays in the public eye, like when he did the whole Coach Sanders bit, and then when they had the whole things that were stolen from the locker room thing, and any number of other things. And they might actually beat Louisiana Monroe this weekend. I don't think that's that crazy. I think Monroe's kind of sketchy, to be honest, as far as how good they are. They're sort of sneakily down my worst teams in the country list. That's not going to happen. So anyway, you guys can put that to rest. I think Mike Norvell will get at least 2 more years at Florida State. I think they understand the gravity of the rebuild, and I think behind the scenes, boosters, administrators, those type of folks are very annoyed that they lost this Jacksonville State game and treated it kind of like a scrimmage for far too long, and when they had to flip the switch, were unable to do so. However, they are pretty encouraged by the behind the scenes things that are happening there as far as program competency, organization, those type of things that were lacking in the Willie Taggart era. Like, to be clear, that's why Taggart got fired. It's because they weren't looking very good on the field, but they were also really struggling behind the scenes with organizational stuff, not running like a professional organization, things that gave administrators and power boosters reason to believe that things were not going to get better. Still think it's risky to fire a coach after 2 years. Even though you probably made the right decision there, it does not allow you to just skip all the difficulties that you're going to have when you go through a coaching change in this new era of signing day. Okay, let's go ahead and talk. So Tsunami Gaming asks thoughts on Arkansas State plus 16.5 and Marshall minus 9.5. I believe I played both of those. I got Arkansas State plus 17. What did they get Marshall at? I actually did not get any Marshall. Is Marshall 9.5 still around? Let me see if I got any of that new. Marshall's actually 10 now. I don't hate Marshall at 10, but I didn't get down on any Marshall. I did get Arkansas State plus 17. But I love Jimmy Lake's defense there in Washington. I think they're really, really good. But Washington's offense is a joke. It just is. John Donovan is not a good offensive coordinator. You saw they were, Penn State. When Penn State fired him, they immediately won the Big Ten afterwards, and their offense did much better. He's just not a good guy to hire. I cannot believe Jimmy Lake hired him to be their offensive coordinator. I understand Washington bringing him back this year because he was only there for 4 games last year, and that's a little bit of a small sample set to let somebody go. But if you're Jimmy Lake, you got to realize like this guy cannot coach, in my opinion. So not a good fit for the college game at this point. So yeah, I do like Arkansas State just because if hypothetically here, let's walk through this. How many points do you think Arkansas State is going to score against Washington? They throw the ball a ton. They play at a very high pace. It's going to be a high possession game. Can they get me 21 points? Can they get me 20 points? Because I got to think, if they do, like, do you really trust Washington to be competent enough, even against a bad Arkansas State defense, to score in the high 30s to cover a 17-point spread? It's possible with the pace. I'm not going to dismiss that. But there's a certain level of incompetence going on right now with the Washington offense. They would look bad against any team. I mean, they lost to Montana. And look, they didn't look much better against Montana offensively than they did against Michigan. And yes, I know there are guys out on the receiving corps. That's true. The whole thing looks disorganized and just it looks way too tough than it should be. So that's kind of my thought on that. All right. Let me see here. RJ Banks wants to know, what about Coastal Carolina and Buffalo? Who do you have on that? I'm torn. Buffalo is tough. Yeah, Buffalo, their run game was pretty poor, to be honest, against Nebraska, and that's kind of what they live on. Not that Coastal Carolina's run defense is good, but the run numbers there for Buffalo were concerning. I think I'm too high on Buffalo, actually, and my numbers say to bet Buffalo, but I'm actually just going against them slightly by avoiding this thing. I'm also curious about the injuries here. Like, this is 13.5 now. I really should be betting this, and I'm just not doing it yet because I want to see how high this is going to climb. There is somebody hurt for Buffalo that I don't know about. I think Coastal's offense is good. I really do. But their defense did not look good at all against Kansas, a Kansas offense that looked terrible against South Dakota the weekend before in the FCS game. That one scares me a little bit. At some point, if this sticks and the market stabilizes a little more, and I'm confident there's not some kind of injury that Buffalo is hiding, I'm going to go ahead and fire on Buffalo. Just from a pure number standpoint. That does not mean I think Buffalo can win the game or will win the game. All right, let's go ahead and take. Interesting. We have a couple people asking questions that we are already answered. So go back and watch the replay of this one. Brian Kessler asked about Pitt. Is Pitt a borderline favorite in the Coastal? So we already talked about that. I think Pitt is a Coastal contender. I'm not willing to call them a favorite really at this point. Let me see here. Thoughts on the UCF Louisville game? And if you guys are asking multiple questions, I certainly appreciate it. I'm going to try to bounce around and, get more questions from everybody before we go to a second or third question from one single person. Even though if you ask a really, really good one, we may double dip. So Reggie Hollywood asks us, thoughts on the UCF Louisville game? Where are you leaning? Any thoughts? Yeah, actually, if you guys watch that live show on Sunday where I'm out there popping these openers, I went ahead and played Louisville +9, and I also played the over 66. So Scott Satterfield does some really inefficient stuff at times. He runs the ball a whole lot, as my friend Mark Ennis likes to point out, on second and long. That is essentially a recipe to kill your drive if you just keep running the ball on second and long. As we know, NFL guys are way ahead of the curve on this. It's a little bit less punitive at the college level because you can pop stuff earlier in a drive, but ultimately it's still not the best move. And Louisville does do it a whole lot. Watch. If they try to throw a play action pass on 1st and 10, it falls incomplete. Immediately they follow up with a run. It is too frequent. I think it is kind of a blind spot there for Louisville. But we saw Louisville score the ball decently against an Ole Miss defense that how much better is UCF's defense than Ole Miss? UCF's offense is certainly not as good as Ole Miss's is. I just don't think this line should have been 9. Maybe I'll be eating crow here. But I made this line 6.5. So at 9, I was getting across a key number of 7. And I thought that was something I had to play, right? Over 66, again, I told myself to bet anything like to go over on any number that was less than 67.5. So over 66 for me was money. The line is now 68. What did I actually make this over under at? So I actually made this over under here, I think 72. Now, I don't like to bet totals super early in the week with just a couple points variance because I feel like then I would be betting, almost every total. I like to bet ones that I feel like are pretty far off, but not so far off that it makes me think I'm missing something. So if there's kind of a spike factor, if you will, right? Like if I think something should be 75 and it comes out 45, what's the chance that I actually have a 30-point edge on Las Vegas? Very unlikely. What's the chance that I messed up something in my spreadsheet? Highly likely at that point, or I'm missing like multiple key injuries, So you kind of have to understand and have some real deference to the market there. You're not going to have enormous edges in a lot of games, especially not coming up to game time. You can have a plus EV advantage over the market early in the week on quite a few number of games. And that's what I've done over the course of my betting strategy history here. So I think this game will be played at a reasonable tempo. I have Louisville actually playing more up tempo this year than normal. And I think UCF will play at a pretty quick tempo as well. This could be a game where we get 14, 15 possessions. And I don't think it's all that crazy that we get 10 touchdowns in this ballgame. So I went ahead and played Louisville and the over 66. All right. Okay, what else do we have? I think we already talked about Miami and Michigan State, didn't we? I've been on a couple radio appearances this morning. Jordan, did we already talk Miami, Michigan State? We did not. Okay. I guess we talked Miami briefly when we did the Coastal discussion. That must have been it. Anyway, so I played Michigan State plus 7.5 to open here. And ultimately, I think that they are a good side, but I would not play them at 5. At 7.5, that made sense for me to play. I think they're a sneaky over team, not in terms of their win total, but that too. I did bet that in the preseason. But the tempo that Michigan State is playing with is elevated this year. This thing opened up at 53.5, and I got down on that actually multiple times. Look, I know Miami's offense does not look quite as good, but Michigan State and Miami are going to play an up-tempo game here, I believe. Like I think this number should be closer to 60, and I still think there's some value in it. I think Michigan State can score. I think Miami, their offense will look better. Miami also lost linebacker Keontre Smith, who we talked about a couple minutes ago in the Coastal discussion. That's a big deal because as we know from the Inside the U guys, Miami had a real weakness with their linebacking core this year, which is difficult. So now that they lost one of their better linebackers, I think Michigan State can exploit that. So Drew, I really appreciate the comment there. This thing is growing. I'm excited about how many people are watching this live stream, Jordan. This is cool. Hold on. All right, Bud, prove you're human. What's your biggest miss this year? Okay, so without giving away the entire Wednesday show, we will be talking about the teams that we have been the most wrong on so far this year. And for me, it's really Washington, right? Ultimately, I really love their defense. I just thought they would be better on offense than they were. Like, I don't like John Donovan, and I still bet them over. And now I'm like, you idiot. You bet over on a team where John Donovan is the offensive coordinator. He is terrible. What are you doing? And I just thought they were going to be better. They recruited a couple quarterbacks who, are I think are talented, and it's just not there. And so I'm very, very sad about that one. Other ones that I feel like I messed up. I thought honestly that Oklahoma State would bounce back offensively. I probably put too much trust in Mike Gundy there. And then, of course, I really misread Northern Illinois. I thought Northern Illinois was going to be a team that was just going to crater and that they would have a coaching change. And all the credit to Thomas Hammock. They go in there, they beat Georgia Tech, they hang tough for part of the game at least against a pretty physical Wyoming team. So I was wrong about that for sure. All right, let's go ahead and take this one from Drew. He asks, "Hey, any?" Oh, sorry about that. There we go. Any talk on the Cincinnati versus Indiana game yet? No, not yet. I'm interested in what your take is on that game. Blowout, close game. Who you got? So I have Indiana +4, like we talked about on the Sunday live show. Did I get a total down in that game? Let me see what we actually got. Yeah, I actually bet under 54.5 in that game as well. Let's see where the current market is sitting. So the current market is Cincinnati -3.5, and the over/under is sitting somewhere between 50 and 51.5 out there. I still like the under 51.5, and I still like Indiana plus those 3.5 points. I don't think that Cincinnati's offense is quite that good, and ultimately that is not something I'm very confident with them going to lay the points. I think Indiana is not as good as people thought they're going to be coming in the preseason. Certainly, Tom and I and other people on the Cover 3 podcast took a lot of flack for basically saying that they're not going to be that great this year. But to me, this line is a bit of an overreaction. I think Indiana is still a good defensive team. I don't trust Cincinnati's offensive line all that much, and I'm willing to take those points at home in what I feel will be a low-scoring defensive slugfest. All right. Let me see. Fan, same Bud. Keston wanted to know how do P5 teams perform in the games after losing the FCS team. I actually don't track that, to be honest, so I don't know. That's an interesting question. Gary Lewis has one here. Before the season, I faded Washington Huskies. I was wrong to bump 21 Utah so much. Bud's right. Utah quarterback Charlie Brewer doesn't move the needle. I just thought he was kind of I don't want to say he's a jag, meaning just a guy. Maybe like can we coin the term jag plus? Like he's not an NFL dude, but he's kind of a little bit better than just a guy. To me, I don't like these quarterbacks who are not that skilled physically, who get a lot of credit when their team wins. And then when the rest of the team around them is not as good, people expect them to carry the team, and they don't do it. So I would put some guys like a Brock Purdy to me fits here, right? It's like, okay, Brock Purdy got so much love as a freshman. Is he really that talented? Is he like a no doubt? Jordan, I love that lower cryon. That's awesome. Is he really like a huge difference maker for you? But Brewer in the spring game was really good. I did take Utah plus 450 to win the South, in addition to UCLA plus 1,000 to win the South, essentially just fading Arizona State and USC. I still feel pretty good about that, by the way. I mean, I think that the South champion will be one of those two teams. But Gary, you're right. First of all, you're definitely right to fade Washington this year. And Brewer, as a quarterback so far, just doesn't look great. Jonathan Carter brings up another one. Tanner Morgan, solid quarterback, kind of a jag plus, right? Not necessarily like a no doubt NFL dude. Yeah, I think jag plus is a term that can stick. That's a good thing. It's like, let's not don't impute team wins to player quality in future years when that team was either like lucky, super loaded with seniors, that type of thing. To Gary's point, Baylor was absolutely loaded on defense that year in 2019. They were. That was a hell of a Matt Rule team he put together. They were also a little bit lucky, Northwestern at Duke under 49.5. Kier wants to know about. Northwestern defense is good enough to limit Duke on offense, and I don't see the offense scoring in the 30s. However, not so fast, my friend. I think the logic is sound on a per possession basis. Well, what are we missing here? Pace. Pace. If this game was being played at a slower tempo, okay. However, take a look at Northwestern so far. Northwestern on a per snap basis, relative to how many incompletes they've had, how many players tackled in bounds, not going out of bounds, first downs, and that stuff. If you do your tempo ratings, Northwestern is a top 20 pace team this year. Duke is a top 50 pace team. So to me, on an efficiency basis, the under is likely to play because I don't really trust Northwestern's offense, and I'm not sure Duke's offense is all that good either. But when you factor in the pace standpoint, I cannot get on board with the under 49.5 because I do believe that you will see more possessions in this game than the average game. I actually made my number here 50.5. So look, I don't think that means you should be betting the over, but I just think that is something. If you don't go into the pace numbers, you're going to be on the under there, and I stayed off the under because of those pace numbers. Okay, staying in order here. We already talked about UCLA. Brewer should transfer to Iowa. That's pretty funny. What do you think when Georgia gets everyone back? Do they have a real opportunity based on the last 2 weeks? Yes, no doubt. Georgia's defense, I think, is good enough that they will. Look, as long as Georgia gets some guys back on offense, Daniels and a receiver, maybe if they get Pickens later in the year, they should have a real shot to do something. Now, they still got to go play Bama in the SEC title game. If they make it there, that's going to be difficult. I am giving Bama the West now with the Haynes King injury because he's not going to be back in time for that Bama game. So if you guys are Georgia fans, you need to be listening to the Junkyard Dogcast, which our producer, Jordan, actually produces the Dogcast. Jordan, if you want to jump in on this one, you hear everything those guys say on and off the record. I mean, if Georgia gets dudes back, you got to give them a puncher's chance against Bama, right? Oh, you're muted. There you go.
Appreciate it, man. All the injuries they've had on offense this year has kind of been really bad. Darnell Washington hasn't played. George Pickens obviously hasn't played. Dominic Blaylock hasn't played. Jermaine Burton's been hurt. And even with all that, still we're able to beat Clemson just based on the defense. Blue UAB out, who I think is a pretty good defensive team. And they've had guys really step up. Brock Bowers has proven to be a really good tight end. John Fitzpatrick has come back. So if they get Darnell Washington back in the mix, they've got 3 really, really solid tight ends. Then, you just wait for receivers to step up. Arian Smith's been hurt too. But waiting on guys like A.D. Mitchell, I think once he pushes back or pushes past, the first few weeks of the season and getting at least one receiver healthy. And we haven't even mentioned Tariq Gilbert.
It would help to have a receiver healthy for Georgia. Yeah.
Yes.
I agree. It's impressive that by hook or crook, if they could get past Clemson, we knew they had some nice runway because they don't play a team that can really beat them given their defense for a while, right? Like USC or South Carolina is not going to beat them this weekend. They're 30-point favorites, when's that? Do they go play Kentucky or some team that can actually score anytime soon?
Kentucky, I believe, is right after South Carolina, I think. And
that'll be interesting.
Yeah, and that'll be in Athens too. So what would already be a pretty difficult game for Kentucky is even harder now.
Oh, and they get Vanderbilt as well coming up. So they have some runway to get healthy here. I think that's an important point to remember on Georgia. 2 or 3 episodes ago, we did for fun Heisman pick, and the one I was thinking about if I had to was JT Daniels. Because I feel like if Georgia's offense struggles a little bit and there's nobody on defense you're really going to give the Heisman votes to, so he's not going to split votes with anybody. If he comes back and all of a sudden some receivers start coming back and they somehow pull the upset over Alabama and Stroud's already taken a loss there, Rattler, if Oklahoma goes undefeated, is going to be tough to overcome. But
would he have missed too much time by that point, though?
He might, yeah. He might have. That's a fair point as well. And he obviously didn't play or didn't put up good numbers against Clemson. I'm trying to think about long shots here because I'm not really looking to throw my money on Bryce Young for 3 months.
Sure.
Cool, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go to the next question here. And I had a couple questions about Arizona State. So Kesna and Austin and a couple other folks have asked, hey, what do you think about Arizona State, both this weekend and then also for the season? So it's interesting. Arizona State was bringing in kids pretty clearly on impermissible visits during COVID when they weren't allowed to have anybody on campus. Other teams in the Pac-12 knew about it, and they kind of threw up the flag on it, and they weren't super careful about doing it, which is why there's like a dossier of evidence. And I think some coaches were sort of, on that own staff, were sort of angry about what was happening, given that they were passed over for jobs, and so they kind of kept their receipts. If Edwards was not the guy for AD Ray Anderson, it would not have surprised me if they had made a move to fire him for cause in the preseason when this came out. But because Ray Anderson is Edwards' former agent, and Anderson, like, that's his guy. He's kind of tied to it. If Herm Edwards has to go, there's no guarantee that Ray Edwards gets to make the next hiring or firing decision, right? So if you're Ray, if you're Ray Anderson, don't you ride this out? Like, that's what you pitch your wagon to. I don't think I don't think it's going to be anything that happens soon. How much they can tie it directly to Herm Edwards will matter here. I think if Ray Anderson can sort of find some scapegoats to get rid of in this, if they have to get rid of anybody in order to keep his guy Herm Edwards, I think he will. That's just my opinion. I have not done any additional reporting on this. I have heard stuff that has yet to come out yet, which would inform my opinion, just to be clear here. But I think that Anderson and Edwards are pretty tied at the hip. So it'll be interesting to see if they can actually just get rid of an assistant or two and keep that thing rolling, or if it's just a total, kind of clean house situation. As far as the game for Arizona State and BYU, this is kind of weird. So I've been down on BYU this year. I bet Utah against them in the preseason and obviously lost. I do think that Utah actually had a decent chance to win that game. And power numbers wise, this is not screaming for me to bet Arizona State, but I probably should have. And I'm going to explain why here. And I think I missed the best of the number. And this is where you just have to be disciplined and say, all right, I missed it. That's on me. I didn't bet BYU here, but in doing a little more research over the last kind of 36 hours, I should have bet Arizona State. And here's why. So Arizona State played UNLV over the weekend. They really don't have, they didn't have a lot of their top running backs in that game. And they didn't seem to be really trying to blow UNLV out. UNLV I did bet, and UNLV covered for us. In watching some of the BYU stuff and in looking at some of the run defense metrics for BYU, I'm concerned. I think BYU's run defense is actually problematic. And I'm going to pull up some stuff here that I grabbed earlier on one of my stat filters. Guys, give me a second here. So Utah actually generated a 25% explosive run rate against Arizona State, or excuse me, against BYU. That's concerning. Arizona State is not a good passing team, despite the fact they have Daniels, who was another member of that 2019 recruiting class that I really just didn't like from the quarterback position perspective. But if Utah's cranking off those explosive runs and Arizona State gets those backs back, I think that could be problematic for BYU. Had I looked more closely at the box score before I did the Sunday live show, I likely would have played Arizona State here. But again, at that point, I also didn't know if Arizona State's backs were going to play. So, yeah, occasionally you got to realize you missed the best of the number, and I certainly missed on that one. Because from a power rating standpoint, it doesn't scream at me to bet -2, -2.5. But now with that additional information as far as the matchups, yeah, it does. I think BYU's front is concerning. I may play this live, right? And additionally, Herm Edwards is a nice live under coach because he's very NFL-like. They don't push tempo at all. They play really slow. If they get out to a big lead, with the exception of the Arizona game last year, they don't start throwing the ball. They just try to win it. They don't really care about style points. We'll see how that goes, but I'm going to watch that one and then try to live bet it. All right. A couple people asked, like, what are some good publicly available power ratings? I think SP Plus is pretty damn good. FPI has its uses, kind of, but it's not perfect, obviously. What's the sucker bet of the week? Honestly, it's probably Vatek, and I'm on it, so I'm the sucker. Gonna be honest here. Having a really strong year, but I had a couple sucker bets last week that I was on and didn't sniff out well enough. I didn't know that Arkansas was going to bully Texas on both lines of scrimmage, and they did. And yeah, I think Vatek here could be the sucker bet, but at least I got a decent number on it. So we will see. Guys, we're right in an hour. I got to jump to some other meetings here coming up, and at some point I need to eat some breakfast, or I guess now we're up against lunch. Tuesday is sort of a back-to-back day. I really appreciate y'all listening to this and joining in. I plan to do this every Tuesday that I'm working. So let's see y'all again next Tuesday. Remember, like and subscribe and hit that notifications button on. Tell your friends, tell whomever you want to tell. Just tell somebody about it. Really appreciate producer Jordan's help on this, and we'll see y'all again next week. Upcoming live shows Thursday at 11 Eastern. We dropped the Locks Pod. It's where I'm going to go into stuff that I still am interested at betting as far as existing lines. And then Saturday, we do the instant reaction pod. I'm going to try to make that one. Got a little mini vacation here. Nice, Jordan. And then on Sunday, we do the live numbers pod on that. So I'll see y'all next time.